welcome to our last episode. My name is Tiffany Herlin, a licensed clinical social worker. I'm so excited and also sad that ours is coming to an end, interviewing Allison Jenkins, an LCSW, and Reggie Wilson, an LCSW, from OASIS Ascent, a short-term residential program that provides stabilization and a comprehensive evaluation for teenagers 12 to 17 who may qualify for insurance. Please remember that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy, and please always seek a mental health professional for your situation. Okay, you guys ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, so this episode, parents, if you've made it this far, you're probably to a point where you're thinking, I've gotten a therapist, my kid's still suicidal, I've asked the hard questions, now what? And it's a hard place to be in as a parent. So we want to talk about how do parents know they may need residential placement, and what even is that?
Well, I think as a parent who has a child who's struggling, when they've done all the work in terms of seeking out mental health therapists, levels of care are important, like outpatient versus day treatment versus IOP. Maybe they're seeing a private therapist once or twice a week, and things aren't getting better. Meaning their kids are still suicidal. They're still have been back and forth from the ER to get evaluated. One of the things that I would suggest is that they consult an educational consultant who can help them and guide them to programs and people who can help. And sometimes that might mean a residential treatment setting, whether that's long-term or short-term. At OASIS, we are a short-term stabilization program. A lot of our clients do utilize educational consultants, which are great.
Can you expound on what an educational consultant is?
Sure. An educational consultant is a person who understands the mental health system and is very familiar with different levels of care. Also are very familiar with what those levels of care, what they specialize in, and how to help families who have children who struggle. A lot of times these educational consultants have relationships that they've built with these different programs over the years, and they can tap into these places to get that help for those families that are in need.
And an educational consultant is so great because they vet the programs. And so if you are in need or you're thinking about, I think my child may need residential treatment, they can also, look at what's going on and then recommend the levels of care with programs they've vetted. So they know that your child will be safe in these programs because they've sent multiple kids to the programs. They may even know specific therapists at these programs that they would think that would be a good fit for your child. And they're also an additional support for the parents and the families because they're there for you in crisis. They're there to help you problem solve. They're there when after the child is finishing residential, they can help you come up with a home plan at home. And so they're very valuable in assisting, especially, parents that are new to where do I start? Reaching out or finding an educational consultant would be very beneficial.
Yeah, especially when you're in crisis, you're overwhelmed, you may be even trauma yourself. It's just it's a support member of your team to help guide you versus having to, while you're in that brain fog and that place of crisis, have to go on and Google research. And it's a vast world.
It's overwhelming.
It's so much to learn. We've been in it for a while, so we understand it. But if I were a new parent in crisis, it would be just so overwhelming.
It's nice to have a hand to hold, so to speak, to help you navigate that whole process.
And an advocate for you.
Yeah.
An advocate for you and your child.
Yeah.
They will fight for you.
one thing for parents to note, you don't necessarily have to have an educational consultant. They're a valuable resource. If it's not something that fits your financial budget, then you can look for placements and
online.
There's lots of resources.
Places online. I know that OASIS, OASISAscent.com is a place for parents to go and just check out the program. But there's also other places that they can go to and visit their website, sometimes even call.
And be sure when you call, make sure you have all your insurance information, and that they take your insurance, and most residential treatments will run a verification of benefits, let you know what it might be out of pocket, give you an idea of how long it might cover. And you really want a place that's going to work well with your insurance company and utilize that benefit that you have.
There are some places that won't, depending on your insurance.
Correct.
That won't be an option for you. It's definitely a stressful time to try to figure out all those things, but it's helpful if the insurance does cover some of it, which OASIS does.
We do. Yeah, we're getting about 66 days coverage of insurance. And that's why at OASIS we pack a lot of treatment into those 2 to 3 months where we have the students. We do, we do treatment as well as assessing and psychological evaluations.
Well, let's jump into that. Why would a parent want to choose a place like OASIS over another place? Tell us more about your program.
There's the different levels of care, and that can be overwhelming as it is. So you have inpatient psych hospital that is around 5 to 7 days, right? And then you have residential treatment that can be 3 to 6, it can be 3 months, it can be 12 months, it can be 18 months. And then you have PHP or day treatment, which is usually you live in, your kid lives in the home and you take them Monday through Friday, 8 to 3. And then there's intensive outpatient, which is 3 days a week, usually 3 hours a night. It's usually at night. And then there's traditional outpatient therapy. So those are the levels of care. At OASIS, if you're looking for a residential placement that, say you cannot afford a long-term program and you feel like maybe your child has been in and out of inpatient psychiatric hospitals and that's not helping, it's helping for the 5 or 6 days and they come back, they're good for about a week or two, and then they go back to, being depressed, being sad. Then a short-term residential treatment center like OASIS would be a really good fit for you. We also, what we do is from day one, we start treatment, meaning that we are, starting to look at the family system. We are doing individual work right away, and we're starting to prep for the psychological evaluation that we provide. We put into the cost of the program. And the psychological evaluation, as we're treating, we're assessing to get an accurate diagnosis. And that is so important because a lot of kids come in misdiagnosed, as we know. A lot of times clinicians are like, we're not sure what's going on. And they really, when they're struggling in all areas, meaning socially, with family and with school, sometimes taking them out of the home and bringing them to a place like OASIS, where they can stabilize and we can start doing the work and get to know what's really going on is so beneficial. We start doing family therapy week 1. We don't do the identified patient model. I mean, we're not a place if you want to send your child to us just to fix them. Then OASIS is not the right place.
Which also doesn't work, by the way.
Which also doesn't work, yes. We do intensive family therapy, and we look at the whole system, and we really support the whole entire family in the process of helping the student support the student.
Don't you also look at the whole child? Like, you don't just
Yes.
look at mental, you look at their physical. They get a physical evaluation, and you do
nutritionist, they get a diet. Yeah, they meet with a nutritionist.
their sleep, right?
We have most of our kids, by the time they get to us, families are they're at a loss as to where to go.
Yeah.
And so that's why educational consultants look to OASIS is that short-term stabilization, observation. And with that, they come in and they get we do a battery of tests. We start out with MAP testing in the with the academics, and then with nursing they get a full evaluation with our from our nursing staff. They see a psychiatrist or an APRN to follow their medications. We do genomic testing, which is the cheek swab to see what kind of meds that will metabolize in their body. So we're not trying to just test things out just to see what works. And then they get a full psychological evaluation, as Allison mentioned. The thing about the psychological evaluation is that it tells us, first of all, it clarifies diagnoses, gives parents an idea of how their child is functioning, how that child sees their world, and the best way to connect with that child. Because a lot of times kids will come in, like Allison said, undiagnosed with, say, spectrum stuff. And so the evaluation will tell parents, like, hey, your kid's verbal skills are through the roof, but his spatial and visual are really delayed, and so the best way to connect with him is ABC. That is valuable, and sometimes parents see that and they go, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Now I can start having a relationship with this child. But also they can use that when they leave to access services in the schools, because the schools can use that to say, okay, this can be a tool for us to serve this kid in the best possible way we can, given the resources that we have. And so sometimes that right there is great. But the best thing that I think happens with that is that it comes with recommendations on future care, and whatever that looks like. The ECs are involved, and
educational consultants.
The educational consultants.
When we started dropping those acronyms, I got to just clarify.
They're involved. But it's really nice because our therapists are in constant communication with our educational consultants on giving them our clinical observation of that child, and then they can use that to make a wise decision on what's next for that family.
And it just helps us as clinicians know what we're treating, right? When we get an accurate diagnosis and a thorough assessment, we know what we're treating, and then future clinicians will know what to continue the work on.
Yeah.
I think another reason, medications are huge. Like Reggie mentioned, some students, have come in on 5, 6, 7 medications, and we're peeling back. Like that's just, peeling back to see what baseline is like, and then adding thoughtfully medications if it's needed.
Yeah.
And so if you are a parent and you've been taking your child to psychiatrists and doctors, and they've just been adding medication, and let's try this medication, let's see if this works. I mean, that might be a red flag too, that like, look, maybe this diagnosis is inaccurate.
Yeah.
If these medications are not helping, and maybe we need to go to a higher level of care.
Well, you were mentioning off air that you see a lot of females come in with borderline diagnoses, but really they have autism spectrum disorder, which you and I both as therapists, we would treat very differently.
Yeah.
And medication's going to look differently, and they both could be exhibiting suicide ideation for both of those.
Yep.
Yeah. So if parents are feeling like, man, we've tried everything, it's maybe because you don't have the right roadmap and the right comprehensive evaluation that's guiding you in the right direction.
Right. And remember, too, outpatient therapy, these kids can mask. Right.
Oh, so good.
They can mask. They can go to their outpatient therapist once a week and say, oh, I'm doing great. Everything's great. And when they're really hurting inside. And so getting them to a residential facility where they can't mask all the time, and they start dropping their mask, and you start seeing really what's going on so you can support them, right? I think that it just gives us a better view of what this kid's going through, right?
Yeah. Well, you have a whole team.
And a whole team
And you're
of people.
managing, you're limiting variables.
Yeah.
Right? So, we're seeing how they're doing in school, how they're doing in the residential setting, how they're doing in therapy, versus when they just come to outpatient therapy, we only are hearing from usually the kid and from the parent. We're not hearing how they're doing at school. We're not hearing how they're doing with peers, and their behaviors.
Yep.
So there's just so much more that you can evaluate and look at.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you guys navigate suicide ideation at OASIS?
One thing that we're really proud of is that, in a lot of residential treatment centers, they train the staff on how to handle acting out kids, right? Like, what do they do if they're going to go after another student? Or what do they do if they're a danger to themselves, like punching a wall or throwing a chair? Well, when we started OASIS, I really wanted to empower the staff on what to do if a kid comes and says they're suicidal. Because I think...
Which most programs don't take if they're actively suicidal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so we train everyone up on how to do the CSSRS. We can do added precautions, to keep the students safe. At OASIS, we can do one-on-ones. We can do line of sight. We're constantly checking in with the student, making sure they're safe. And yeah.
Well, I think the great thing is you have a whole team, right? It's not just two parents trying to navigate
locking up all the knives.
Yeah.
That's sleeping in their daughter's room.
Exactly. Yeah. You've got a whole team. That stuff's already all secured, and their child's being monitored. Mm-hmm. And then you're diving into the deeper issues, like we talked about in the last episode, that it could be 10 different things of what's causing the issue. Mm-hmm. So then you're diving into okay, yes, you're suicidal, but what's really going on?
Yeah.
How can we help you? Let's give you the tools like
in a
DBT.
safe environment where they can be safe. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing about this level of care, because we are a medium secure facility, but we also have the resources to monitor and manage suicidal ideation. For example, Allison talked about the protocols that we have. Those things go into effect. Everybody's trained on the Columbia Suicide Rating Scale. There are sometimes when maybe a client cannot commit to safety and has done several things to show us that he can't be safe, and those are sometimes where we'll go to the ER. But again, once they are evaluated at the ER, they come back to us, and so. Part of that is a behavioral management thing, because some of these kids just want to get out. And so they'll say anything or they'll do anything. Well, we're going to take you serious, and we're going to get you to an ER, and we're going to see, we're going to monitor that. And you know what? You're going to come right back to a safe environment. So doing that to get out is not going to do the things that you want it to do.
Yeah, you're not going home.
Yeah, you got to come back. You got to come back, because there's a need for you to come back, and there's a need for you to learn the skills. And we're not just going to say, okay, mom and dad, see you later. We can't handle this. That's not what we do.
No.
So we get them back, and if we have to do it 3 or 4 times before they get it, then we'll do it. And they do get better, because that's part of that's part of that strategy that they have sometimes, where they want to just run away,
get out of the pain.
They want to get out of the pain. And so that's the other piece to that, is we have the resources where parents can't do that all the time.
What a great reprieve for parents. I mean, I know a lot of parents who do end up sending their kids and get to this point, or they feel guilt and shame of I failed as a parent, but at the same time I feel relief. So it's this mixed feeling of, and it's helping our parents understand no, you didn't fail, and please now go sleep at night. Please now go get the help that you've desperately needed that you haven't had time for because you're just trying to keep your kids safe.
Right.
And we've got it. we've got a whole team keeping your kids safe and trying to get to the issue and not just react to the suicide ideation, but to dig deeper and to get them the skills they need and whether it's through DBT or CBT or whatever.
Get them the trauma therapy.
EMDR, all that stuff. And so what a great resource. And on top of it, I mean, there's insurance coverage as well, which isn't always the case for programs.
Right.
So not only do you guys offer a comprehensive evaluation, you also offer stabilization. And it sounds like it's about, 2 to 3 months is when how much they're there. So tell us more about what the stabilization may look like.
Yeah, I think I mentioned before that when I was explaining the different levels of care, I think that's important to note as a parent. And, a lot of times stabilization looks like an inpatient psychiatric stay, which is 5 to 7 days. And in that stay, the students aren't being challenged. They don't go to school. They are able to, journal, do groups, not a lot of challenges, not a lot of family therapy. And so they leave there and they go home for a couple weeks, and then the thoughts, the behaviors start coming back up again. And so
it's more like a Band-Aid, right?
Yeah,
it's not
a
really
Band-Aid.
Fixing the problem.
Exactly. Maybe throw some meds on, send them home, safety plan them and send them home. And when I worked at the hospital, that was one of the main concerns of my parents. It's like, it's just not enough time. I don't feel like we've gotten anywhere. I don't feel like anything's changed. I feel like, and I'm like, in a way, you're right. I mean, they were here for a week. You got some respite to lock your knives up and make sure everything's locked up at home. And nothing's really changed. And so the stabilization piece for OASIS really looks like the student comes in and we start stabilizing through groups, we get them into school right away. We have the ability to monitor them one-on-one. We can do one-on-one interventions as they're stabilizing, as they're making their way through school and doing all of the daily challenges. So our stabilization really looks like, how are they thrown the day-to-day challenges, family therapy, individual therapy, school, interpersonal relationships for a longer period of time? And how do we teach them the skills to manage those things in the real time, in real moment, in real time, if that makes sense?
And you're not just throwing meds at them, you're actually getting them the right meds and the right dosage.
Or repealing meds
you're
to
taking
see
meds
what their baseline is without the medication.
Yeah. And you have longer than 5 days to figure it out.
Right,
yeah, and we're not in a hurry to safety plan and get them out the door. We're very thoughtful, and we have a lot of time while we're throwing the day-to-day challenges at these kids.
Yeah, I would add that one of the things that we really need to look at and helping, our students and their parents understand is that that these kids come in hot, like you mentioned that word hot. They're not going to be perfect. No. And being able to normalize that and being able to say that, hey, look, Johnny came in here throwing tantrums, and having suicidal thoughts 10 times a week. And now he's only doing it, once or twice. Mm-hmm. That stabilization, being able to structure the kids in terms of their day-to-day, things that they do, going to bed on time at a certain time, eating dinner at a certain time, going to school at a certain time, getting them into a normal routine that is consistent with most kids their age, so that when they leave, they're used to that. And so when I talk about stabilization, along with what Allison said, I think that you have to include, they're not acting out as maybe we didn't extinguish everything, but certainly they know how to manage it now. So,
what is the next step after OASIS? Where do kids typically go?
That's a good question. We have some students that end up going to like a long-term residential, right, where they need the more supports for a longer period of time. We have students that go home with wraparound services. We have students that we actually have a day treatment at OASIS. So we've had a lot of success stepping our students down from the residential to our own day treatment with the continuation of care. They see the same providers. They have the same, not the same clinician, but the same people around them, the same teachers to support them and support the families. And so then we're testing the waters, doing the day treatment to make sure they're going home at night and being safe and using their skills and coming back in every day and going to school and doing groups. And so that would be an option too, a day treatment level of care. I really, there's been an upswing in the term parent coach. And parent coaches are a lot of times retired education consultants that start a parent coaching business and can get hired by parents to help them plan for the next steps, to plan on, how to integrate your kid back home, to plan on what are we going to do with the home contract, to plan on how do we support you navigating boundaries being pushed and all of those things. And so that's another good avenue too.
Yeah. And I'll just add, I'll just add that, wherever they go, it's always in consulting with their educational consultants and with the therapists, because again, like I said before, they are the ones who really are the experts and tapping into the information that's derived out of the assessment, and then referring to parents what they feel might best support that teen.
Yeah. Thank you. You guys have provided so much information. If you're a parent looking for more, you're welcome to visit their website, and there's a lot more to the program. But I think ultimately it's important to realize that you're not alone. There are resources. There is help. Education consultants are great resources. And then really, if you don't have that option, to really vet a program and call the people who are there and ask them all these questions and get to know the program better, even visit it. So
come visit it, tour. We give tours all the time to prospective parents. We also have a list of parents who have had their kids at OASIS that parents can reach out to and talk, like without admissions or me there, navigating it. It's just parent to parent, like really tell me the dirt. How was the program?
Yeah, the good, the bad, the ugly.
The good, the bad, the ugly. And so that's always another good resource. And a lot of times when parents come tour, if students that are there currently can come talk to the parents and kind of give them the heads up of like, hey, I feel safe here. I'm taken care of. I love my therapist. I'm feeling supported.
The food's okay.
The food, yeah.
I don't know. Some kids.
We have to get up
I love
early.
The horses.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so
like
there are, if you are vetting a program, there are a lot of creative ways you can go about finding out things about the program. Not just by just reading the reviews. The reviews can sometimes be mixed, and those can be scary, but like dig deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to circle back. We started this conversation about suicide ideation and helping parents find hope and healing. But I'd love to end on some success stories you guys have regarding that you could share with our listeners.
Yeah, I'll share a recent one. I had a young man in our program not too long ago. And parents for the longest time struggled with why this young man was so focused on things like his devices and the things that he would access through those devices. He had really a hard time connecting in school. This young man was bullied, and a lot of times it was because of his behavior. He was his worst enemy. But on what it looked like is that he was being bullied, and so parents struggled with the school. They spoke with all the administrators there, and things were put in place, and the bullying continued. It kind of circled back to the home where the young man was being very disrespectful to parents and very annoying to the point to where it caused division between he and his parents and his sister. And it got to a point where he was really depressed because he didn't have any privileges. The parents thought the only way that they could kind of respond to him was to take privileges away. And he got to the point to where he was suicidal. And so they've tried outpatient, they've tried other programs, and came to OASIS. And through the work that they did at OASIS and the testing, they found out he was on the spectrum. And this was such a relief, not only to the parents, but to the student. And it makes so much sense to him, especially when it talked about how to best connect with that student and how that student sees his world.
And kids autism spectrum disorder struggle to connect.
And they struggle to connect. But we used that information and came up with a plan, met with the school, told the schools what we were seeing and what we thought would best work in that environment for them. And this young man is thriving now. And I couldn't be happier. The parents have called. They've given us great reviews. But they left. We had a graduation for him, and there wasn't a dry eye in the graduation because he'd come so far. And so I'm really proud of that. And there's other stories like that as well.
I can tell the emotion in your voice that you put a lot of heart and soul and work into that young man, and it sounds like they did the same because it takes both ends to really work hard and get to that place. The parents and the child and the therapist all come together as a team.
Yeah,
thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, I think of a student that came in very depressed, and I always tell my clinicians, like, if I had to choose between a kid throwing a chair at a wall or an acting in kid that's isolating in the corner, I would choose the kid that's throwing a chair at a wall any day.
Yeah,
because the internal depressives can be so scary, right? And this was a scarier kid. And at night, every night, she would try and choke herself. She would wrap her leggings around her neck. She would anything she could find, she would try and hurt herself with. And as we started to do the work and started to get the assessment, we figured out she had a sexual abuse when she was younger that came out that she'd never told anyone, with a neighbor. And so once that came out, when she was able to get vulnerable at the function of the suicidal thoughts, just the guilt and shame around it. And they were good friends with the parents, this neighbor, and so all of the complexities that led to that this abuse happened, had her to have guilt and shame. She felt worthless. Her parents expected her to be perfect. She couldn't live up to that anymore because of her trauma. So she kind of, was like, why try? I'm just better off if I wasn't here. I wouldn't be such a burden. So doing the trauma work, first coming in and figuring out the function of the suicidal thoughts and what was going on, and then diving into the trauma work, having her tell her parents, helping the family system heal, helping them all understand how the trauma affected this young woman. And through all of that work, we just kind of saw, we had her on precautions, but we just slowly began to see a decrease in the behaviors. And sometimes in treatment, the progress is slow. And sometimes it's small wins, right? Like sometimes it's like, oh, they've self-harmed 5 days in a row and then didn't self-harm. Then they started back up.
Yeah.
That one day.
We're going to celebrate
one day, yeah. So we started to see a decrease in behaviors. And then in the suicidal gestures, I meant. And so we started to see a decrease in those at night. And we started peeling back her precautions. And then, we kind of felt like we got our medications to a place where they needed to be. And she was doing her trauma work and working with her family. And by, I bet it was day 75, her parents were like, we want to bring her home. And she was going off campus, and she was, this was a kid that the parents were sleeping basically on the floor of her room. They were so worried. And they had every knife every bottle of pills locked up in their room, like double locked. And to go from that to a healthy what she's functioning, she's healthy. She was a cheerleader.
We want her home.
We want to bring her home. And we were at the time going like, oh, there's no way they can bring her home when she first came in. And then she walked out the door at her graduation, and I think the reality that set in for her too is understanding that her suicidal thoughts can come back when she has hard times. Like they weren't cured, but she had the resiliency and the power to manage them. And she didn't, she was victimized and she wasn't a victim anymore, and got that trauma work, and her family healed. And and this great work can happen in short spurts.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for sharing beautiful stories. And I just want to end on a message that if you're a parent listening and you're struggling, there is hope, there is healing.
There is help.
And there is help. And one last thing is, even if your child isn't able to overcome these struggles and they struggle with them for a very long time, there's still hope and healing for you as a parent. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean you're a failure. And this is such a bigger issue, as we've uncovered in these last couple episodes, that is complex and so heavy and hard and difficult to navigate. And you're not alone is the biggest message we can leave with you.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Really appreciate it.
We appreciate you.
Yeah. And thank you for our listeners tuning in.